12,000 years ago, our planet was emerging from the last great ice age. It had locked the Earth and all the humans living on it in an icy grip for 100,000 years. But now suddenly, the planet was warming. Temperatures rose by more than 5 degrees in just a few decades. Ice sheets were melting and sea levels rising, with disastrous consequences for many of our ancestors. Off the south coast of England, archaeologists are uncovering extraordinary evidence of a once thriving Stone Age settlement that's now 11 metres underwater. Farming began in a region of the Middle East known as the Fertile Crescent. It then spread further east and northwest into Turkey. For about 190,000 years, our ancestors had lived nomadic lives, wandering the landscape for food. The invention of farming meant this was no longer necessary. People had learned that in a favourable climate, it was much easier to grow your own.
What were they growing then?
Well, we find different types of wheat, and here we've got a charred wheat ear that has been impressed or preserved in a mud brick, and that's a beautiful impression of a...
So it's been burnt in the brick.
It's been burnt, and that, hence the preservation.
Wow, that's spectacular. And what kind of tools would they have been using then?
So here we have the collection of stone tools that they would have been using. This is a quernstone.
Oh, what's a quernstone?
Well, they would have used that as the base, and then something like this to start crushing the grain,
okay,
wheat, any food stuff like this.
So they're making flour then?
Well, we think they're making flour, yes. And then for crop cutting, they would be using tools made out of obsidian, which is a volcanic glass, and working it is technologically quite difficult to do. So it's something that they've achieved. You can see an example here, very, very fine chips and very sharp.
And this would have been attached to something long?
Yeah, yes, it would have been attached to a haft, and here we have some of the smaller flint tools that they would have attached to a haft, and it would have been used like a sickle blade. And if you look carefully, you can just about see the sheen on the edge, which is the sickle glass, which gives us an indication that they were actually cutting the crops with these tools.
Unlike their hunter-gatherer ancestors, global warming had allowed the first farmers to settle, build houses and villages, and develop new skills such as producing pottery.
This is an example of pottery from the earliest levels, and you can see that it's quite thick. And from this thickness in the middle of the sequence, we come to pottery that is very thin-rimmed. The clay becomes much stronger, lovely shiny gloss on it. They're getting better at everything.
This is the Western Desert in Egypt. I've come here to find out how thousands of years ago climate change created this extraordinary landscape and transformed the lives of the humans who were living here. This is the most incredible landscape. I don't think I've ever seen anywhere so completely devoid of life before.
It's true, it's amazing. Look around you. You can't even see a single blade of grass. But just imagine 10,000 years ago to 7,000 years ago, this was a quite lush environment. You know, there was water here, there were plants, trees, and people.
Fekri's taking me to the remains of a settlement where a group of those humans lived. Oh, this is archaeology, isn't it?
That's right.
Those rocks there, are they some kind of structure?
Well, they're the foundations of a house.
Oh, it's quite little, isn't it?
It is little, but it can house about 3 to 5 people.
3 to 5?
And remember, this is... Yes, you can get in.
It's a bit of a squash, 3 to 5 people.
Well, it depends on how you sit. This would have been the foundation of the house, with some of the slabs are still standing. And then it would be like a wickiup with all kind of branches and then covered with maybe skin of animals and all kinds of different things to make it habitable.
Is this another one over here?
Yes, there is one. right there, and actually you can see a whole row of them.
This is one here.
Right. You
And then another one.
into one, yes, one behind it.
This one here.
Yes,
Two more behind it.
yes, and more.
So if they're all in a line, what does that imply?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is that why would be aligned like that, and that would suggest that there is some kind of a social structure. Another factor is the fact that this is the shore of a lake that once existed and covered this whole depression.
It is very hard to believe that at one time there was a lake here.
You can see these hillocks are the remnants of the lake bed that once existed here.
I see, so all the rest of the lake bed has eroded away and it's just left these stumps sticking out.
Absolutely, because this was a continuous surface. It was a continuous lake bottom.
Archaeologists have found evidence of lakes and lakeside settlements like this one all over the Sahara. That's because 7,000 years ago there was lots of water here in North Africa, supplied by regular monsoon rains. Life flourished, humans and their prey. But then, disaster struck. The climate changed. 7,000 years ago, a shift in atmospheric pressure caused the monsoon rains to weaken and move south. In less than 2 millennia, tens of thousands of square kilometers of lush, fertile savanna were transformed into the parched Sahara Desert we know today. The lake here dried up even quicker. What would the effect of the people who lived around here have been?
Well, the effect would have been catastrophic because they've lost all their life resources. The water is gone, the plants are gone, the animals are gone.
How long do you think this whole change took?
Well, remarkably, it didn't take very long. It only took about 100 years.
100 years from a brimful lake all the way around here to this barren waste?
Absolutely. Within 3 or 4 generations, it was gone. It's an incredibly huge event, a global event of intense impact.
For the inhabitants of a settlement like this one, the gradual weakening of the rain and the encroachment of the desert meant they had no alternative but to leave, and leave behind a way of life that had been in their blood for thousands of years. It must have been a bewildering and devastating experience. But what would they do next? The answer takes me, as it took the Saharan refugees, several hundred miles west. Their only hope of survival was to find a source of water that the drought couldn't dry up. Something like this. The River Nile. And what a sight it must have been for those desperate Saharan refugees. But before they could begin their new life here, they faced a challenge. Just look at the landscape of the Nile. On either side, you've got a few tens of meters of green, fertile abundance, and beyond it, on either side, hundreds of miles of desert. No water, no vegetation, no life. There simply wasn't enough room here for a nomadic lifestyle. To survive, the Saharans had to find an entirely new way of life, and that's precisely what they did. Less than 1,000 years after severe drought forced the first refugees to abandon the barren Sahara Desert, they'd built Hierakonpolis, one of the world's first cities. 1,000 years after that, they'd become citizens of Egypt and were writing, trading, and building the pyramids. The Saharan nomads had come on a remarkable journey. They'd not only established one of the world's first cities, they'd established one of the world's first kingdoms. And by doing so, they'd created a model by which humans, not just round here, but all over the world, would begin to live. And still do today. In the 12,000 years since the end of the Ice Age, we've transformed ourselves from being a mere species to being civilized, sophisticated, political people. Living in kingdoms, cities and villages all over the planet. It's a remarkable story. And we did it in the face of climate change.